Hi, my name is Isaiah Orlin. I'm the founder of Higher Frequencies, an entrepreneur, executive, lawyer, physical fitness enthusiast, and a seeker of enlightenment and higher frequencies. Higher Frequencies is a community platform based on the pillars of spiritual enlightenment, wellness, music, and travel. Our mantra, discipline our senses to purify our mind, body, and soul through our spiritual practice, physical fitness routine, nutritional behavior, and relationship with self and others, hopes to provide guidance in our community's quest in reaching higher frequencies and moving closer and closer toward enlightenment, understanding we are all one collective energy. Each episode, we will bring you thought leaders from various sectors of business, nutrition, physical fitness, travel, music, and spirituality to discuss their stories and the modalities of discipline they lean into to reach higher frequencies. My guest today is Angela Pih, a dear friend. Angela is a high-performance growth driver, elevating brands and market value through innovation, strategic marketing, and targeted sales initiatives. She's an award-winning, trusted global brand builder with 2 decades of experience in cannabis, fashion, beauty, and luxury lifestyle brands. A frequent technology first mover with many of the cannabis industry's most innovative software platforms, e-commerce, analytical tools, and also a board advisor, 3-time CLIO award winner, and Rolling Stone Culture Council member. She is passionate about transforming brands, accelerating growth, and developing high-performance teams. Our topic today, the evolution of brand, breathing life into brand, community, and culture. Hi, Angela.
So much for having me on here.
Such an honor. Why don't we start by giving the audience a little overview about your career from like agency to now?
Boy, we're going to have to go way back, right?
Yes.
Well, I guess it started when I was 16 years old on vacation with my dad. And we're talking about, so what are you going to do? You know, what are you going to study? What are you thinking about? And it was really my dad who really gave me the idea of going into the advertising agency world. He said, and you really love creativity and you really understand business and you love business. What a great way to be able to commercialize creative. And especially since it really tunes into what brands and advertising does, for companies. So it happened, way back when. And then from there, after I graduated from college, I started my career at Young & Rubicam, which is a Madison Avenue agency,
Wow.
global. By the time I joined Y&R, it was probably 200 offices in, 50 countries, if not more, I started on the Ford Motor Company account. So I started in automotive and went from automotive to Heinz, which is a household brand, and then went on to Procter & Gamble, Tylenol. Part of my stint during the late 90s was really opening up the mid-price tier in China, where I launched Tide and I launched Tylenol and relaunched Olay in the China market. But I built my entire career on global brands. And what I can say about global brands and brands in general is that it really, as a marketer, forces you to really tune in to what consumers want, what are some of their needs, behaviors, and try to understand them first before to try to sell them anything.
Yeah, and we're gonna cross. So 2 things you hit on there that we're gonna cross in a little later in the podcast is the pricing matrix.
Yeah.
And customer segmentation, what it used to be, and how it's changing now with AI.
Oh, for sure. I mean, you think about back then, if you had the budget to be able to do so, you want your commercial to hit 3 times. And then
Right.
you're going to be able to measure those impressions and then look at sustaining with print, outdoor, newspaper, and all that. And with the advent of digital marketing, performance marketing, and, social ads, the game has completely changed in terms of what do we have as marketers within our toolbox, and how do we really approach the fragmented segmentation of the marketplace. So from the agency, kind of going back from the agency world, then I transitioned to fashion, which I'm sure we're going to talk about, and then from fashion into cannabis, where I've been since 2019.
What do you think, and we'll get in, so for fashion, for the audience, Angela was CMO of Halston at one point, and she's being modest with regards to cannabis. In the inception years in California, ran 2 of the most prominent brands, Care by Design.
Care by Design, Papa and Barkley.
And Papa and Barkley.
Yeah.
And, we've worked on a number of cannabis projects together. What would you say, and we're going to get into the real differences, but like what would be the main difference between the fashion world? Because there is a fashion element in cannabis brands.
Of course, it's lifestyle.
It's life. Okay, so that really, and that's what we're going to trigger is in a few comments here is, you know, the difference between a lifestyle brand, a utility brand, and where things are going now. So let's jump on into that in building brands. Yeah. When you're first looking at a brand and dissecting the market, what's the first genome of the brand you go to? Is it the people? Is it the community? Like what for you, what's the first thing to start understanding the brand?
Well, I'm very data driven. So I look at the data.
Yes, I know.
I will look at the data first. What's the data telling me in terms of who's buying the products from that brand to begin with? And then looking at the business of the brand and the products and, in terms of supply chain, how do you make it? I think one of the first questions I would ask a potential company with brands are, first of all, how do you make money?
I think that's the best question to ask because everyone has these ideas of vision, but you and I talk about this a lot. Vision is nothing without execution.
For sure. And also creative is nothing without commercialization. So I think that's where, my couple of decades in the agency world really taught me that creativity has a commercial purpose.
Gotcha.
And artistic endeavors and creative ideas, they still have to be able to commercialize because we're operating within this confine of a business world.
Right. And we were talking about this the other night at dinner because now you're with C-Cell, which is more of a utility company, I'd say.
Mm-hmm.
How do you define a utility brand?
Well, if you were to pare it back down, it really comes down to, is it useful? Right? Is it useful to you? Is it useful to me? I've read a number of articles about, what is your why? Everybody talks about Simon Sinek in terms of what is your why and your purpose. And, people talk about Apple or Nike, but ultimately it still has to serve a functional purpose.
Correct.
You want your phone to work.
Correct. But it's not, utility brand can eventually be a lifestyle brand, but in a lot of cases it's going to be branded by someone else after the fact with a parent brand on it.
For sure. So if you think about Intel Inside.
Correct.
Or you think about NVIDIA right now, NVIDIA is a brand in and of itself, but it's also accelerating a significant, well, not just significant, it's accelerating our AI.
And that's really comes down to is a brand B2B and B2C. It's an and or equation that you really have to, because as a marketer, would you say that adds an extra layer of difficulty in branding and segmentation if you have to brand for B2B and B2C?
Yes. And when you're marketing to the intersection of where you do have a B2B business, but a consumer can only experience it to bring it to life, then you have to also think about what is that consumer experience. You're also marketing to the consumer as well. So constantly marketing to the intersection, especially now in terms of media, the lines are so blurred that you can't just be a B2B brand and you're not just a B2C brand. You are both because you're speaking to everybody. It's just the various strategies and tactics that you employ are different, but you still have to be the same. And that's where your consistency matters. And I know we're going to touch on this whole idea about brand DNA, your ethos. And for me, it's really simple. A brand is a promise.
Interesting. I always would say, and we'll talk about this too, and we're going to get into that. A brand is a promise, but with social, we can humanize the brand now. So
of course,
it's trust at that point.
Right. So way back when I first started my career in the agency world, working on brands, the brand was the hero. The brand saved the day. Right?
Correct.
And now we're in an age, and that's been transitioning over the last decade or so, where the brand is not the hero. You, the consumer, are the hero. We enable your superpower. We enable you to achieve what you want. I think that's where that emotional connection with the utility and purpose and function really matters. Like, The brand is not the hero anymore. We're not the ones that save the day, but we enable you to save the day, whatever it is that you want to achieve.
I've had some, downloads in my ayahuasca ceremonies and things like this. I might challenge you a bit on that, because is the brand a hero, or does the brand have to stand for something more? Does the brand have a duty now to help develop the person's ethical and emotional IQ?
I don't think it has to, but if it chooses to, that's for a greater good.
Right. So, and I think some of us are tasked with that mission, is to develop brands that are
purposeful.
Which brings us into the idea of people throwing around this idea. Everyone says, I want to create community. I want to create community. I want to be a lifestyle brand. And I have a definition of that, but what's your definition of a lifestyle brand?
So many cross sections. I mean, you can think about, Jack in the Box is a lifestyle brand, right? Because
an unhealthy one.
Yes, but we're talking about lifestyle brands. Like Supreme is a lifestyle brand.
Correct.
The Kardashians have huge lifestyle brand and huge following, and there's a lot of choice out there. But as a lifestyle brand, I think what it's able to do is really hone in on frequency, resonance. Is it relevant to me? Does it capture my attention and make me feel like I belong?
Is it a friend I want to hang out with on the playground?
Yeah. Well, also when it comes to, let's say, apparel, you're wearing that brand or you're driving that car. That's your outer armor, right?
It's an extension of who you are.
That's right. So the brands that you choose are the company you keep.
Correct. And I think also with a lifestyle brand, and there's the opportunity for vertical and horizontal integration into other categories. Not per se the brand is going to do something that's not within their expertise. But take Casamigos, for example, the tequila, right? And then they did a deal with Sugarfina. They're not in the candy business.
No.
But Sugarfina had this great idea. Let's get the flavor profiles in our candies and now that's another revenue stream that they don't have to, there's no exposure on it. There's brand exposure. Talk about brand exposure when you do a cross-marketing campaign.
Well, a lot of people do cross-promotion or collabs in order to be able to reach an audience that they don't normally have the attention of. If your audience is, a wellness crowd or something like that, who are, super into wellness and choosing the absolute right lifestyle choices, whether it's food, apparel, building materials, any number of those things. But you want to try and push it and try and entice an audience who aren't as, at the core of wellness, maybe at the periphery,
right,
fitness interested rather than fitness core. Then you might want to reach out to a brand that has that type of a following in terms of their consumer base and say, hey, can we do a collaboration? Can we create something, create a capsule collection or something like that?
Right.
So that we can, build with what you're strong with together with who I already captivate and build something that's bigger. I mean, I think that's where it's the best.
Were you able, like with Papa and Barkley being a healing cream, is there any campaign that you were able to cross brand with a brand, or was it too nascent in the market for acceptance, like at an Equinox or something?
Well, we actually did have a product at the Equinox Spa.
Amazing.
In New York, in Chicago, and that was exactly the type of crowd and consumer of fitness and wellness enthusiasts that we wanted to reach, because the Papa and Barkley CBD cream, which is available nationally, versus the Papa and Barkley
derived from hemp, yes.
Derived from hemp, versus the Papa and Barkley that is in the regulated market in California, that cannot cross California lines. So we did create a CBD line, and there were our balms and our creams that were used in the spas for massages, and that we were sampling at Equinox, and for it to be made available.
And just in case the podcast ends up in a non-market of Equinox, it's a high-end luxury gym, predominantly in areas such as New York and California, that has a very strong following. And you can make brands there.
Absolutely. Yeah. So it's in a way, it's a form of social proofing. You know,
Correct.
you've heard that term before, where if you're showing up in a place where your desired consumer is already frequenting, then you have this level of acceptance. It's like, if it's cool enough for Equinox, if it works for Equinox, then it must be okay.
And in cannabis, it's also, you mentioned the difference between hemp-derived products and the difficulty. We're going to get into the fragmentation of the cannabis market and how difficult it is to channel market currently. So when you can get into using CBD into a channel where you're talking to consumers that might not go to a dispensary or might not have access due to the rules and regulations on social of seeing the parent brand, the cannabis brand, you're able to open up that conversation with a consumer that you did not have a touch point with prior.
For sure. I mean, the Pop and Barkley CBD traveled nationally.
Yep.
We had a very robust e-commerce business where we can ship it, you know, from our fulfillment center. I think it was in Colorado at that time.
Yeah.
And while we cannot ship the California product, we still wanted wellness to be able to travel. And when people are able to experience the healing properties of a product and create that safe access, because we know that the product is very clean.
Yes.
We have the opportunity to be almost like an ambassador for cannabis wellness into different audiences. You're not going to get high from a bomb.
CBD, right.
You're not, well, even with a THC bomb,
Correct.
you're not going to get high.
Correct.
So if it's actually your first interaction with cannabis and you have a favorable experience, you're more likely to try it again. And then also maybe potentially open up to, what else can this magical plant do for me?
Right. It takes away the aspect of, you know, the dime bag of high school and introduces the consumer that there's actually 120 cannabinoids in that plant that all have active healing ingredients. And THC is the only one that has psychoactive ingredients.
That's right.
And that's really where the cannabis market will go in the future, but we're not there yet.
No, and I grew up with plant medicine my whole life, you know, with traditional Chinese medicine. So the idea of a healing plant that's being created and treated in a way that's clean and healthy, and it's going to help you feel better, is something that feels very close to me. You know, I grew up with a lot of, you know, bark and leaves and berries all boiled into a brown broth.
Correct.
There is a belief that traditional Chinese medicine heals the source and the root causes of what ails you.
We talk about that on the show, how in this country we're practicing medicine 2.0 and it's about customers, not cures. And, you know, we want to get to a place of medicine 3.0, but I think, you know, we have to fight the barrage of what the consumerism on the pharmaceutical side is right now.
For sure. Pharmaceutical companies are built on keeping lifetime customers.
1,000%.
But when we're thinking about, you know, living well and feeling well, you shouldn't have to be popping a pill for that every day.
And you shouldn't have to wait till you're sick. You should be proactive in using the ancestral medicine, or you call it plant medicine, or we call it plant medicine. There's been thousands of years of this being used, and the science is meeting it. And to think that we're so reluctant to let the science meet it because of this industrial complex is problematic.
Oh, I completely agree.
Yeah.
You know, this plant is in jail as well.
Oh, 100%. I mean, look, it takes away from, you know, we talk about this on the show, even with psilocybin. It's going to be very disruptive to the SSRI market, the Xanax market, and these are tremendous, tremendous profit centers.
For sure. If you think about healing, pain relief, anxiety reduction, appetite, you know, you can actually induce appetite or you can suppress
it.
Appetite, depending on what cannabinoid combination that you want to derive from the plant in a you know, very healthy form, not just a distillated or isolated form, but actually whole plant medicine.
Absolutely. And all of what we call the entourage effect, which it's shocking to me that conversation really has dwindled on the marketing side, what the entourage effect is, you know, but okay, we're getting down the rabbit hole here on this stuff. Let's veer back into brands in general.
Sure.
And what I like to call brand humanization. And I'll give a little overview and then I'm gonna let you talk about it. Yeah. So I always say, like, when you're a kid growing up, and I don't know if kids still play on school grounds, but they should, you you never want to hang out with the person who's self-congratulating themselves or saying, I'm the best at this, that, and the other, right? But you want to hang out with the person who says, oh, I'm into biking, I'm into going to the beach, and like, why don't you come hang out? And so that's brand humanization to me, is really defining the pillars of the brand. Like with higher frequencies, it's travel, music, spiritual enlightenment, and wellness. When I was at LVS, it was wine, food, conventions, sports, and give the brand that ethos, right? Why don't you talk about what your feeling is on brand humanization and maybe how you dissect it when you're brought in to humanize the brand and understand the community you're going after?
It's not quite scientific. A lot of times when I'm brought in to uncover that brand DNA, what is it? It's in a way almost like excavating. When you're looking for something that's there, it's there, and it just talks to you and says, what do I want to be? What am I? And it sounds a little woo-woo.
It's not.
A lot of people might go, what do you mean? I'm like, well, kind of a bit of a brand whisperer. I listen to what the brand wants to be. I don't just look at the data and look at the science or, look at what's available. I have to kind of sit with it and wait for the brand to talk to me.
I mean, the data I almost think comes in secondary, right? It's like you can start painting the picture. It's like, to me, building brands, the initial thing is an art. You're getting downloads, right? But
I rarely talk about how I wait for the brand to talk to me. It's like
it's the most important part. You should talk about it more.
Well, because it's not definable. When I sit with a brand and I learn everything I can, it's like when you go to a new country, and before you get there, you want to learn about what are the best places to see, what are the best places to stay, how do you get the color, the smell, the texture.
But until you get to that country and walk around the streets
and experience
and it doesn't mean anything.
Nope.
I can make 1,000 lists, but like now that I run, which I didn't used to, but when I go to a new city and I take a 5-mile run that first day, it's like the city comes alive and you understand what the energy is.
That's right. You have to be in it.
Yeah.
And just like, in the cannabis industry, you have to be in it. But I would say any type of brand building, you have to live and breathe the brand in order to really capture the essence of what it is. And then you shape that into, what does it stand for? What is its DNA? What are the qualities of that brand? How does it speak? What's the nuance in terms of the visual language, the verbal language? How does it present itself? And what is its promise? What is it that it is promising you? What is it doing well? All of those aspects are part of that genome that you're talking about in terms of the brand DNA.
And it gets into the functionality of the brand, the customer segmentation, and the loyalty.
You will. You'll kind of get from the center of the brand in terms of what it is, what it feels, what's the texture, and then you kind of go layers out into, how does it talk? How does it stand up? How does it behave? Is it, keeping the promise that it's making? Well, what does that look like, right? So you'll hear that a brand must be loved on the inside before it's loved on the outside.
So I think you're talking for the audience. The functionality of the brand is one thing. The promise on what it's going to do, the effect of it. The emotional branding is really the sell.
For sure. Well, what does Disney stand for?
It stands for family. It stands for community. I always use when InBev bought Anheuser-Busch, right? And they took Bud Light out of NASCAR and they wondered why their sales dropped. Where was the first person, a father and son, had a Bud Light?
Yeah.
Or a Coca, I don't drink Coca-Cola, God bless them, but the Coca-Cola and pizza scenario, right? When you're growing up, right? Like,
is that sharing?
It's what, when I was in the alcohol industry and even in the cannabis and even what I do now, like breaking bread with people, what's in front of you when you break bread. Like, I won't do business with people I don't break bread with, because it's like, I don't know who you are, right? And the contract means really nothing if I don't know who you are.
Nope.
Right? And that to me is what the brand is, what is showing up with us. Whether it's the restaurant, in the nightclub, in the travel experience, and it's very interesting. So that brings us into the next aspect. brands as creating community, right? And how it's so difficult now because this generation has ADHD like we've never seen before in our lives,
That's
right?
true.
And everyone, it used to be you had a captive audience, right? How do you create community for a lifestyle brand? How would you do it? And it's a loaded question, I know.
No, for sure. How do you find your people, right? How do you find your community? I would say you really have an opportunity to tap into what they believe in, what they aspire to, and how they hold themselves up as individuals, and you tap in to understanding what that is and saying, we get you, we speak your language, we live the way that you do. To have that, when the word authenticity gets thrown around so often, like you have to be an authentic brand, like, well,
how can you be an authentic brand if the people that are creating them half the times aren't authentic to themselves?
Right. And so when you build that kind of community, you can get a lot of hype, and you'll have that community for a short period of time. But then when you're not shouting loud enough, and you're not really spending the money to be able to capture that kind of attention, that community goes away. So how do you tap into that deeper connection?
And so I guess that brings into the next question, the discussion of, and I really hate the word influencer marketing, right? But I see two types of quote unquote influencer celebrity interaction, right? One where you go super wide, you're using everybody, and one where that person becomes a brand owner. And they take onus. And that only works, in my opinion, if they take onus of the brand.
Well, you kind of look at, since we're talking about celebrities as well, right?
Yeah.
Kardashians versus Paris Hilton.
Yeah, I mean, the Kardashians are a lifestyle platform, right?
But they have brands, and they are a brand. And they are influencers.
And Skims is a great example because she also went wide with the partners on it, right? Not only the human partners, but the institutional partners like the NBA and things like this. And I mean, look, the valuation went into the multi-billions after like a year. Yeah.
And then you look at the fashion brand, Good American, right? Also a Kardashian brand.
Right.
They tapping into the body positivity, curvier consumers who are seeing, it doesn't matter, what shape, size, height I am, you are seeing that it's okay.
And that's where it's confusing to me because like, is that authentic because of all like the modification that family has gone through? I mean, is that really, I don't know. I'm not knocking it because I'm not.
It's hugely popular.
It's hugely popular.
Yeah. But the authenticity, because we're talking about that too. And then on the flip side, when you think about, Paris Hilton, she's nothing like what she projects herself to be as a outward facing personality. Like her voice is different, the way she behaves is different. But
it's a caricature. She's created a caricature over the years, and it's not that it's not authentic. It's just more of a caricature of her personality. What could be the downfalls of associating with a celebrity or an influencer? I mean, there's pitfalls there, yeah?
For sure. You can't control a person.
You can't. And now you have all these, there's companies out there.
Well, look at the whole Kanye situation and Adidas.
Oh, yeah. I mean, look, I used to be a fan of him and I wish him well, but...
He's got some demons too.
Yeah. And, I'll hold my tongue on my thoughts on him, but God bless him. I see a lot of the YouTubers now getting into the CPG space, with Mr. Beast's success, and there's companies like Night out there, which we had spoken about in the past that are opening these channels. But look, and I'll say it on the show, even with Prime, like it's a poisonous sugar drink, from Congo Brands, and they're using their platform. Now they have a non-sugar entity, but the first one was highly addictive
and harmful.
Right. So like Is there a social responsibility that's being missed right now with these celebrities and influencers?
I believe there is.
Okay. How do you regulate that? You can't really.
You can't, because
Because cash is king.
well, that, and also everybody's a channel now, right? It used to be that you only had certain channels. You had your newspaper, magazines, radio, TV, outdoor. Those are your 5 traditional channels. And you have experiential marketing, right?
Why don't you define omni-channel for people before we even get into the sales and marketing? Sorry, that's later in the, but since we're here, like, let's define omni-channel so people understand what you're talking about.
Full omni-channel really is an amalgamation of really understanding your customer journey. You know, how do they hear about your brand? How do they become curious about it? What are the various interactions that they have before they even start, you know, researching into your product and your brand, and how do they find it? So you've got basically a combination of your customer journey as well as your digital and online marketplaces and platforms, and your brick and mortar store.
Right.
So bringing it all together from those 2 dimensions is omnichannel.
And budgeting for that is not the easiest thing in the world.
Of course not, because performance marketing is a formula. It's a pay-to-play thing.
And at that point, you have to, what people don't understand, I think, is that you have to throw out test strategies and see where the ROIs lie.
Mm-hmm.
So you might think, oh, I'm going to do this. You know, we're talking about Champs today, which are out, like, where it's the distributors you really got to market to, not the end customer, because ultimately those distributors are running the mom and pop smoke shops.
That's
and
right.
They have the cash and grabs. And if you're not marketing to them, it never gets to the customer.
That's right, because they are your gatekeepers.
Dangerous.
So, yeah. So then if you think about with any kind of business, you're going to have your concentric circles, right?
Mm-hmm.
So even though you have your end consumer in mind, but then what are the various gates that you have to get through in order to be able to reach that consumer? So if you're talking about e-commerce businesses, you're going to target a certain profile or persona of consumers who you feel would be most interested in your brand and your product. And you're going to figure out all of their behaviors, their media behaviors, their purchase behaviors, their consumption behaviors, and you're going to dial all of that and calibrate all of that and create a overall marketing strategy to go very, very targeted towards that person. Now, you're also going to think about who's this person going to be influenced by, and who are the adjacent target consumers who are kind of close to that consumer, but not quite. But the level of data that we have available, like, we're going to be able to tell you how much you spent at the gas station for, you know, the last time you filled up a car.
Right. And get into that. That's where the AI is going to come in the future, and really segmenting the consumer. And we spoke about this on another podcast with Robert Rippey. The segmentation of the consumer and how you can touch that consumer is going to get wildly changed, because you're going to know the consumer better than them in certain situations.
Yeah, they're going to know whether I go to the gas station down the street or, and you know, do I fill the tank up all the time?
You buy a pack of gum while you're there.
Exactly. Do I pack that in a way, as a marketer and as a human, I'm not so concerned about. I'm more concerned about the news cycles and how headlines reach us, that I feel are our society. Now we're getting into kind of like off topic, but
that's good. This podcast is really about higher frequencies, yes, and building brands now.
The way AI is shaping and deciding for us what we see, I think is causing a lot of the polarization that you and I have talked about within our society. If I'm only seeing news that the algorithm thinks I'm interested in, what I see as news might be completely different from what you see as news.
We see it going on in the political cycle this week.
Right. So that's actually the part of how these tools and algorithms are being implemented in a way where it sounded like a very useful tool or utility, right? To be able to hone in on effective marketing so you're being efficient. But if you're taking a lot of these types of tools and honing in on who's eyeballs and ears you're reaching, and that gets narrower and narrower and narrower as a community and as a population, how are we going to live alongside one another when my truth is absolutely not the same as your truth because you're being fed completely different sets of information than I am?
But doesn't that then also go back to the concept of, do brands have a duty to, like, whatever the functionality is, there needs to be new emotional overtones of spirituality and of healing? And I know that's difficult because sometimes that's against. I guess my question is, you have a daughter that is going into her sophomore year of college, right? Mm-hmm. Do her and her friends talk about aligning with brands that have their core ethos and ethical values, or is it not even a conversation when they buy something?
It is, because she buys thrift.
Okay.
And she doesn't go into a branded store.
I have a friend I've worked with who's worked on some major brands, and he was telling me this, and we see it with like the secondary market in sneakers and the Real, that's this generation, that it's going to be more of a secondary market experience, which also, I mean, there's a tremendous amount of toxicity and waste in the fashion industry right now.
Yep.
That
and
people don't know.
Her and her friends don't want to contribute to that. So she's going to the thrift stores. She's looking for one-of-a-kind pieces. She's looking for upcycles, right? Yeah. In terms of those items. But it's also not buying into the commercialism of, fast-moving brands that, as you know, I mean, right now, for fast fashion, it's not even 12 collections. It's like every week.
Right, like a Zara, like where they're just pumping things out, everything's in-house. But that's also interesting though, because Zara's got it down, they have it down to a cycle where they don't have so much waste because they know their cycle.
So they're not creating or producing as much per collection.
But what they also know is the price point that they know that the consumer will buy multiple pieces every month. And there's a great new store here, friends of mine, called Santa Thrift, which is exactly this. It's the new version of, like, I would say a Salvation Army, but much more trendy. And that's exactly what they're doing. It's this new version of thrift store that it's really catching fire. If you're in Vegas, definitely check it out.
Absolutely will. Well, to that point about community, who do you spend your money with, and buying thrift, there's a store in LA that my daughter goes to, so loyal to that store, called Cactus.
Okay, wow.
Yeah,
I never heard of it.
Yeah, Cactus in Westwood. It's not far from where we live. And she goes into the store. She finds the items that she loves. The people in the store know her.
She has a relationship with the people in the store.
And they'll call her and say, hey, we've got a couple of these items that just come in. You should come and check them out. We think you're going to love them.
It makes me think of, like, growing up, and music was everything in our household, and I'd go to the Wiz every Tuesday for new releases, and you'd have a conversation with the person there. It wasn't like this, like, oh, I'm going to download this, not listen to the whole album. Like, no, then next week you would talk about the whole CD. And it created community. Just like in the sneaker culture, it used to be you would go to a lineup and you get sneakers and talk about that community thing. I think it's a trigger that's coming back because we have a loneliness epidemic.
Well, the pandemic really accelerated that. I think that loneliness epidemic was there to begin with. It just exacerbated it when we were sheltered in place.
Correct.
And you were isolated on your own. And then, people who are kind of coming into their own of that certain age, where they're learning social skills, they're learning how to be in community, and they've been kind of cut off from that for 18 months, 24 months.
Longer if we were in California, yeah.
That's true. So how do you develop those social skills?
Whether you observe the rules or not, that is.
And then now with many virtual working environments.
It's terrible.
How do you learn how to read a room?
How do you learn how to read someone's face and have a conversation?
Well, most of the time, the faces that you're seeing on social media are not the real face anyway. So that's pretty challenging.
Well, that's a whole aspect of the psychological implications of social media. When we grew up, we knew the issues that might be in the family's houses next to us. People are portraying these perfect lives, and it's creating a tremendous amount of psychosis, right? Because you're like, well, why isn't my life perfect? Well, because their life's not perfect either, and it's not meant to be. The whole point of life is having obstacles so that you could move closer towards enlightenment. Without those obstacles, and that message gets lost on social media.
Right, because everything's so shiny and varnished
and pretty.
and gorgeous.
Yeah.
Yes.
So so that was a little more of a ethical, emotional conversation, but let's take it back to a little the pillars of building a brand and the difficulties, because everybody says, oh, I want to build a brand, right? But then and we're gonna get to sales marketing after this, but like the legal, the financial, the accounting, I know it's not your thing, but supply chain management's definitely your thing, and you've been in some industries, both fashion and now cannabis. Maybe talk to the difficulties of the supply chain in cannabis and people so they really understand how difficult it is to get a brand to market.
Well, first of all, your brand is not your packaging. A lot of people in cannabis kind of fall into that pitfall of, oh, we have great branding. And I'm like, oh, okay.
What's in the package?
What is, and they're showing you their packaging. And I was like, well, that's your packaging, not your branding.
Mm-hmm.
You think about how your brand is your why and your marketing is your how, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what does your brand stand for? Why that purpose? Getting back to the person, what does it represent? And it really wasn't until I was on the innovation part of the cannabis industry where I was wearing two hats, both as a marketing leader within the companies that I've worked with, but also bringing to market multiple new products or new brands that I really had to understand supply chain.
And just so the audience is aware, like in the alcohol industry, we used to say, the package should be beautiful, but if the juice doesn't dance, it means nothing. But we only had to deal with the juice, right? In cannabis, you have multiple form factors you have to deal with, whether it's a flower, a tincture, a gummy, an edible, So there's these quality control things that the team might not know about.
So when you think about speed to market, you want to have your product or your new brand on shelf within 6 months, right?
I mean, otherwise the market's already pivoted.
That's right, because the market changes very, very quickly. So
we were talking about that today with regards to 1 gram and 2 gram smokable devices.
Absolutely. When the market just shifts, and are you ready for that? So in product development and product innovation, understanding that speed to market is really important. So you're trying to hit a 16 or a 24-week launch cycle. Having really, really strong understanding of supply chain, of what are the various aspects that you're going to need from a procurement standpoint, from a production, formulation, extraction, every single aspect, all the way to then thinking about, oh, I finally have a packaged product that my sales team can start speaking to a buyer about, but getting into the right window. Like, nobody's going to talk to you on the 1st of April about bringing a new brand into the market, because
not when 420 is 2 weeks away.
Exactly. So
they've already got their deals.
That's right, and they're going to well, talk to me after 420, right?
Yeah, and in Las Vegas, you have the alcohol schedule goes against pool season, it goes against the major holidays, and then a lot of the major companies do buys in the half year to take advantage of. So there's all these things that people who are not
understanding the seasonality,
they don't get.
Where your windows are.
Like, I just want to build a brand.
Well, okay. And, I just knocked that logo off on Canva or something like that, right?
Right. And it's so cool.
And yeah, absolutely.
Right. But it's a hard lesson for me in building the cannabis brands. Unfortunately, my sister-in-law had done project management for Motorola for 2 decades. So I learned the pain of dealing with project management, but also how it's probably the most important aspect of building a CPG. Even to the fact that what people don't understand is if those parts hit a factory at different times and you don't own the factory.
Well, the company I work for owns its own factory, so it definitely controls that aspect of supply chain. However, we can't control Chinese New Year.
30 days of no movement.
Right.
And then if you have a client stateside that's using that device and they're ordering packaging plus the cannabinoids, and that's all hitting a factory they don't own, 4 days changes the ROI on that product.
For sure, because you might have all your packaging ready. You might have your, if it's going to be an extracted oil or a certain type of flower that's sitting there, it's, cannabis is a perishable good.
Yes.
And a lot of people don't understand that. It's not like the same as like alcohol.
it's perishable. And I think people need to understand this with cannabis who are not in the industry in two aspects, right? People are looking for that born on date, but by law, when it's tested, it needs to be pulled from the market at a certain point if it's not sold.
That's right. So you got 36 days. So 360. So you have 360 days to sell that product. Or, you know, some companies actually get it retested and they can stay on the shelf longer.
Up to 2 years, yes.
Yeah, but, you know, the benchmark is 360 days. But if you are a flower consumer.
Oh, no consumer is buying something that's on the shelf with a 2-year date on it.
Well, no consumer that I know would buy packaged flower that's been on shelf for more than 45 days.
And do you think that's why the traditional market's still so strong? Because it's just fresher product?
Yeah, the turnover. And, you know, you have a lot of retailers or even smaller mom and pop type retailers who might not understand inventory management and inventory turnover and how to manage that in terms of your promotions, in terms of your incentive, you know, programs for consumers to come in. So being able to kind of like juggle all of those aspects of retail really makes a huge difference in terms of your loyalty from your consumers, but also it impacts on your cash flow.
Yeah, and look, so we've gone through the developing of the brand. We touched on the supply chain, the community, the legal financial accounting can be its own thing. And like, if you don't know that stuff, like, good luck.
Yep. There are a lot of don'ts.
Well, I think the most important thing that for legal that people overlook is intellectual property. And really shoring up their contracts, obviously, but understanding, did they do a search? Is that mark out there? Are they infringing? Like wild stuff, right?
Well, let's take Champs.
Oh, it's all infringement.
I walked past this booth a couple of days ago. Am I allowed to name names?
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't care.
So I walked past this booth a couple of days ago. The name of their 12-ounce slim can was called Cocaine.
Oh, yeah. I've seen that company.
Right?
Yeah.
So I was speaking to the person who owns this brand, who purchased this brand and is marketing this product at Champs. And I asked him, so what's your trademark? You know, how's that coming along? And he goes, oh, it's not trademarked. It just kind of like registered. And I'm like, oh, God.
Yeah, and Champs, like, it's a hit and run business. So what people don't understand about that, and you understand this, is that you can go make 20 million in a year just pumping a product out. So they don't really care about the trademarks because they just make their money and run, right? It's just such a really interesting business, that shops.
Right. So then when we think about the legality and responsibility aspect of, well, I'm somebody who looks at label claims, like what's in it. Because
Yes. But you're not that target 18-year-old consumer. And that comes down to also what the goal of the business is, right? So if my goal of a business is to build a brand for a flip to a brand house, that doesn't work because the most important thing is the IP. If I'm in a hit and run industry, such as head shops, and I can go make 20, 30, 40 million dollars just pumping some toxic products out, I wouldn't do that, right? Because for me, I want to build brands because I either want to graduate them and sell them to, or I want the brand to become a platform which is what higher frequencies is, which is an expression of my lifestyle that will hopefully help heal and help people and get them into their elevated consciousness.
For sure. I mean, as a marketing professional, I'm happiest when I'm aligned to the purpose of a brand.
Yeah.
And am able to bring that into the market and help them amplify that purpose. Right.
Which is what we discussed a bit on, like the marketing channels and the omni-channel strategy. Let's give the audience a little overview. We touched on it a little bit, but let's dive a little deeper on sales. And the way I want to, we've got 10 minutes left. The way I want to break down the sales conversation is, in cannabis and alcohol and all these regulated industries, you really have 3 tiers, right? You're the supplier, you're the brand.
Yep. Or wholesaler, the brand.
Right. Well, you supply, and then then there's the distributor, which is in some cases regulated, in some cases not. Yeah. And even in the fashion industry, you have distributors. And then you have the retailer, which is either your storefront, which you own and operate,
Yep.
or it's someone else's storefront you're selling through.
Yep.
So you have a direct to retail component and a direct to consumer. How hard is it managing all of that? And maybe talk a little about those different things. I know that's a lot.
It's fun though,
Okay.
because I've worked with brands that don't have a distributor license and don't have a retail license or retail stores. I've worked with brands that are fully vertical, that have cultivation, manufacturing, and have their own distro, but don't have stores.
Is that sustainable?
I'll get back to that. And then I've worked with companies that have stores that are fully vertical, have wholesale brands, and have distribution. So what's different about the cannabis industry from the alcohol industry with a three-tiered structure is that you can't cross those lines, right?
In alcohol, correct. You can't cross those lines, and that was done for a reason. I don't know if it's the reason it worked out, but it was done for a reason.
Right. And in cannabis, you can hold all three. You can have a cultivation license, you can have a manufacturing license, you can have a distro license, and you can have retail license.
Which I'll argue is one of the issues that California has because it creates just too much confusion. The distributor should have caught the taxes, and a supplier shouldn't be able to be a distributor.
It's very muddled. I think
Yeah.
it's probably the easiest way to say that. And there are benefits to being fully vertical. There are also benefits of not being fully vertical. I would say if you are a company that have a retail presence, that's a very powerful position to be in because you're actually interacting with your end consumer, the people who are actually coming in. And you can also give preference to your own wholesale brands that you have within your portfolio.
So you're alluding to controlling the conversation across the structure.
You're actually controlling shelf.
Oh, even more important. Well, obviously because there's shelving fees legally and illegally, both in cannabis and alcohol.
You're controlling shelf space.
Right. Like in alcohol.
And distribution to consumer, not distribution to retailer, but you're controlling distribution to consumers.
And with cannabis, it's even more different because like in alcohol, you have the drink menus at restaurants where trial can occur. There really is no trial. I mean, the on-premise is just starting in cannabis, but it's extremely muddled.
Well, it's also not very profitable right now. So everybody's just dipping into their own model and to see how it goes.
So sales and marketing, it can be a whole.
It's fun though.
It's fun, right? And really at the end of the day, it's about the ROI, right? Are you looking, first of all, you got to keep the business afloat, right? So if you are looking for an acquisition, it still has to stay afloat to get to the acquisition.
Yep.
And how difficult are the margins right now to do that?
Very, 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 very challenging.
A lot of varies there.
Yes, especially since I'm only in the regulated market. I don't cross over to the unregulated market. If you want to be able to grow and scale and become a larger enterprise over time, you're going to have auditable books. You're going to have to show your SOPs, and then you're going to want to have your IPs that are of value because it's the brand that's valuable. It's your process and your SOPs that are valuable in terms of your approach.
So that's the sales side, and on the marketing side, let's round it out just a little with a little more of the artificial intelligence aspect, right? How can a cannabis brand, being that their conversation is limited due to regulation, take advantage of learning about their customer through AI?
Oh, there's so many ways to be able to do that. Anywhere from targeting and understanding the personas, using AI tools to manage your business more efficiently, and also, helping you write content that's going to really target that consumer.
That's interesting that you brought that up, is having the AI write the content, but you still have to fact check it.
Of course.
And so what you're saying there is the two triggers that I had heard are loyalty marketing, customer retention management, and then content creation. That's where that benefits. Awesome. Do you have anything else to add on that? No? I
would just say, know your purpose, do good work, and put good out there in the world.
Yeah. So do you have a preference of being fashion, cannabis, lifestyle, or wherever the wind takes you?
Just be in integrity.
Cool. Well, thank you. I always like to end our podcast with a little roundabout back into higher frequencies and spirituality. And, you know, one of the dialects that higher frequencies draw us from is Kriya Yoga, which is Paramahansa Yogananda. A lot of people know the book Autobiography of a Yogi. Today is actually an auspicious day because Babaji, who is one of the avatars that founded, really passed it on to Lahiri Mahasaya, which then gave it to Yogananda, made his appearance to Yogananda today. So it's a great day for meditation. And a lot of the dialects and a lot of the thought processes that we pull from here on higher frequencies come from Kriya Yoga. I spent a lot of time at Lake Shrine in California, and what I always found so interesting is the comment of welcoming all faiths and all denominations. And I think we're at an inflection point here in history where if your religion isn't promoting bringing people together and you reaching enlightenment, you need to really question if it's a religion or a cult or really serving its purpose for spiritual enlightenment. So I invite everyone, do a little meditation, maybe dig into Kriya Yoga as it welcomes all religions and all faiths, and keep reaching for those higher frequencies.
Amazing.
Thank you, Angela.
Thank you, Isaiah. Thank you so much for having me on the show.
Amazing.